Today's guest is a Vanderbilt graduate and former professional baseball player. After retiring from baseball, he started down the corporate path with Google and a hedge fund, later worked for a cryptocurrency exchange, before building an audience on Twitter where he was helping people become healthier. He's the founder of Insanely Addictive, where he's offering performance coaching, helping people break through their limiting beliefs. This dude is super interesting, just the way that he thinks about career, relationships, his health, and just optimizing his performance. Super unique guy, and really appreciate his time. His name is Alex Feinberg. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with Alex. Quick shout out to the Meat Mafia boys for the intro. I appreciate it, fellas. And I hope you're doing well out there and enjoying the holiday season. Happy holidays as we head into Christmas and New Year, and just appreciate you tuning in and supporting the show. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Alex Feinberg. What's up, man? How are you?
I'm doing great. Pleasure to be on. Ready to talk.
Yeah, courtesy of the Meat Mafia intro. So we were just saying, Brett and the Meat Mafia and Harry, great dudes, man. And what they're doing is awesome. So yeah, Brett and I go back to school, and obviously you guys had the chance to connect, and our buddies down in Austin. So appreciate them making this intro here.
Ready to dive in. Let's rock.
Let's go. So, all right, man, I'm just going to throw this right at you here. So your Twitter bio, I use behavioral psychology, hedonistic maximalism, and a triple stigma IQ to help you perform at your peak.
Yes.
Can you just run with that and just?
Okay, I can decode that very quickly.
Yeah, please.
Maybe it would make sense to give a little bit of a background on how I got to be where I am today, and that started at Vanderbilt University. So I worked very hard in high school to become a college and then professional baseball player. That's what I wanted to do my entire childhood and early adulthood. And, I had a few offers to go to various schools, Stanford being my initial top choice. But I took my official visit to Vanderbilt, and I really, really liked the vibe that Coach Corbin was building out with this practice. And this was before Vanderbilt was, the number one school that good students wanted to go to play baseball. And so they recruited me, because they wouldn't recruit me now, but they recruited me back then. And so I committed to play in the SEC, committed to play for the top academic school in the SEC. And one thing that I noticed when I was in my marketing class and my finance class, were taught by the same professor, Professor Cherry Clark at Vanderbilt, was that the people who were in good shape, the bankers who were in good shape, who wore suits that fit them, were so much more capable of convincing me that something they were selling was a good idea, that I knew that I wasn't the only one who felt that way, who had the emotional pull to agree with the thing that the charismatic fit dude said. And so I realized that if I want to have every advantage that I can possibly have in the business world after my baseball career is over, whenever that would come to be, I needed to be in shape. But I was never willing to eat sissy salads, count calories, go hungry, do anything that I thought I had to do to be insanely ripped after my playing career got done. One thing that happened when I was at Google is I maintained my dedication to training all through my early and mid 20s. And I realized accidentally in the weight room, where I started changing my programming, wanted to run faster miles, but fewer miles, that resulted in a metabolic change that had me burning fat in ways that I never could have possibly imagined. And rather than think, oh, that's kind of a fluke, it shouldn't have happened, I'll just go back to training and eating the way that I used to, I began a multi-year exploration to figure out, how ripped can I be while following a couple basic guidelines. Number one, I was never willing to train harder than I would train if I wanted to be in the gym multiple times per week, meaning I couldn't train so hard that I dreaded coming back to the gym. Second guardrail, I was never willing to go hungry. Third guardrail, I was never willing to count calories. Fourth guardrail, I was never willing to sacrifice taste in food. So I love eating pizza, I love eating burgers, I love eating tacos, I love eating fried chicken. I was never going to give any of those foods up to hit any of my goals for being shredded. But what I was willing to do was rebalance the macronutrient profiles of the foods that I was eating or preparing for myself. And I was willing to change up the ingredients to shift away from processed ingredients or processed seed oils to more natural ingredients like an olive oil or an avocado oil. And it was a multi-year experiment to see what could I do if I was unwilling to abuse myself, punish myself, if I wanted to enjoy every meal of every day, what kind of shape could I get into? And I found out over doing this for multiple years, not only was it insanely fun, it was insanely addictive, which led to what my company is called now, because I teach people how they can get super fit without hating their lives, without hating their diets, actually looking forward to all the food that they eat, without dreading their workouts, actually looking forward to most of them. And so what I did was I actually used the fact that I was an economics major at Vanderbilt. I used my triple sigma IQ. I was actually tested as a 145 IQ when I was in high school because my parents were wondering why I had trouble reading, considering I was very good at math, but quasi illiterate in English. And so they took me to a learning psychologist who told me that my IQ is, ahead of 99.85% of the population. And so I have to think that, that might have played into some part in creating a fitness system that has allowed me to stay in phenomenal shape over the last 10 years of my life while I've been super busy as an entrepreneur, as an executive, but loving every meal of every day, loving my workouts, loving everything that I do, kind of breaking all the rules that people think they have to follow to be in great shape. So my bio is downstream from that.
It's great. Yeah, I know we just kind of jumped right in there, but your path, you weren't really a highly touted recruit or anything like that. Well, I guess to a certain point you got to Vanderbilt, so you got some attention. But prior to that, there was a lot that you said, you weren't really the most talented growing up, but you had to outwork everybody. And it's almost like
Yeah,
you use these systems to get to every step that you've gotten.
right. I hit one home run my entire high school career between travel ball and my regular season. I just had no power. I wasn't very big. I had good hand-eye coordination as a shortstop. And so I had some offers because I could play defense and I could hit for good contact. But I was never the kind of guy who was going to run, a 6'6", 60 at a showcase. I was never the kind of guy who was going to hit, light tower power in batting practice. I was the kind of guy who was going to be consistent, who's going to work hard, and you're going to want me on your team because I was going to make everybody on that team better. But I was never a guy who pro scouts would look at and say, "Oh, we need to draft this guy at the head of the draft." It was more, we'll take this guy in our system, but he's not going to be a priority. That ultimately ended up being the case when I got drafted by the Rockies. It was, they took me in the 43rd round, which no longer exists today. I had started for 4 years at Vanderbilt because despite Coach Corbin's best efforts in trying to find a more talented person to put on the field ahead of me, he couldn't do it. And so he was stuck with me playing second and third base my freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior years. But I never had the best anything. I was just always adequate in most categories. And I had to figure out ways to compete. I had to figure out how scouts thought, right? Because even though I hit 300 every year in college, they weren't interested in me after my junior year, right? You look at my stats, my junior year to the stats of some other guys who got drafted in the first or second round. And honestly, they weren't really that different, but I didn't have the physical characteristics that most scouts look for in high round draft picks. And so I needed to learn how they thought in order to modify myself and modify the way I presented myself to pro scouts and to coaches in order to get the shot that I thought I deserved. And you know what that is? That's sales and marketing. And that sales and marketing perspective translated incredibly well to getting my first job at a global macro hedge fund after I got done playing baseball, because I had to sell myself to the hedge fund manager. I came from a non-standard background. Financial markets, rely heavily on consumer psychology. And so the fact that I could articulate irrational psychology that I was having, but irrational psychology that those around me were displaying, made me seem like an enticing hire for the hedge fund manager who I came to work for. And ultimately, the experience that I got at that hedge fund led to me seeking a career in tech, because I learned that central banks around the world were going to dump cheap money on financial markets, and the most speculative sectors were going to do really well, including tech. And then ultimately, it helped me get into a cryptocurrency job because, sort of the basis for Bitcoin is that governments are going to devalue currency if you let them do their thing long enough, which is something we've seen over the last 10 years. So every step of the way, I've had to learn my surroundings in order to outcompete other people who had more prototypical backgrounds, whether it was on the baseball field or whether it was at a hedge fund or whether it was at Google or whether it was in the crypto space. All of my peers had a background that was more enticing, more cookie cutter, easier to sort through for those in the selection process. And I had to figure out how to get myself at the front of the pile, at the head of the line. And the same skills that got me drafted were skills that got me job offers. And the same skills that got me job offers were skills that ultimately allowed me to navigate the corporate world in ways that a lot of successful athletes, unfortunately, haven't really been able to, because they're not, in my view, willing to recognize that you're still playing a game when you get into a corporate environment, but the rules of the game have changed. And if you try to play your second game by the same rules of the first game that you were good at, you are going to be very frustrated when you see yourself losing to people who you think you should be able to outcompete and who you could have outcompeted in your first game day after day after day.
So has that mindset that you just explained, do you see guys that you play with at Vanderbilt, have any of them adopted that, or are they like, what are they doing with their careers? Like, do you stay in touch with any of those guys, and do you see that and are like, why is this guy doing that? He has so much talent, you know?
Yeah, I'm in touch with a lot of the Vanderbilt guys, and actually the Vanderbilt guys are quite successful. So,
Okay.
I didn't realize this at the time when I was committing to Vanderbilt, but Vanderbilt ended up becoming the prominent college baseball school to create a pipeline to major league front offices. And so a lot of the guys that I played with at Vanderbilt ended up becoming major league scouts, major league pitching coaches, major league first base coaches, major league bench coaches, major league general managers. And so a lot of the guys who were my teammates 15 years ago are actually making very good livings as members of the coaching staff or members of the front office for Major League Baseball teams. Now, obviously, most of the people who I played with are not involved in baseball at this point anymore, but a lot of them are successful as private wealth managers, construction entrepreneurs, small business entrepreneurs, taking on family businesses or building their own. And so there aren't too many people who I've looked at from Vanderbilt who I thought, wow, this guy should be a lot more successful than he has been. There are a lot of other people who I've played with in the Rockies organization or in high school who've hit those challenges, right? Because I do think that there's a minimal IQ requirement that athletes need to have in order to properly transition from one environment to the next. And I think that for athletes who just aren't that smart, it's really, really hard for them to make that transition in life because they aren't capable of learning the rules of the new game that they're playing. And there's probably a little bit of stubbornness or hesitancy to accept that they're playing a new game, but that applies to everybody, no matter what your IQ is. But if it's hard for you to recognize patterns and hard for you to realize that the game that you're playing isn't the game that you were good at, you're not going to succeed. You're going to just keep hitting your head against the wall, wondering why I'm putting in so much effort compared to people who I'm more talented than and why it's not moving the needle. So I think the middle ground is people who are capable of recognizing that something's different. They're willing to do something to win, to learn the new game and then win it. Those people can be helped. Unfortunately, a lot of the athletes who are really good at sports, they're good at making split-second decisions. Their decision-making process is superior for any game that requires a half-second or 1-second decision. But when it comes to more analytical processes that can be preferential in business decisions that can take 30 minutes or 30 hours or 30 days to develop, they're commonly at a deficit to other people who were better students than them.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, because and that's just what I've experienced and what I see. Like, people aren't willing to play that game, but because they see, and you can speak to this from being in a big corporate environment in Google. Sometimes you can get um, like dejected, or you can just be like, dude, why am I even playing this game? I should be doing something else. So maybe, can you just maybe share when you got to
Yeah.
Google and then playing that game and then saying, hey, this isn't what I want to be doing. I need to shift to something else.
Yeah, it was a multi-year process, and it is
Yeah. Yeah.
very,
What I
very
think you said it was
demoralizing.
like 10. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry to cut you off, but you were like, this was 10 years that I went through this. Yeah.
Yeah, it was very demoralizing for me to, number one, try to get into Google because I had this macroeconomic idea that the tech sector was going to do really well. And I was an ex-professional athlete who graduated with honors from a top 20 university. And so I thought, okay, well, I have this. I know some people who work at Google. I should be able to get an interview and talk my way into a job. Well, that worked in theory, but in practice, when I would submit my applications for these jobs online, nobody would call me back. I would get rejected time and time again. And I was working with a headhunter at the time who was setting me up with other potential job offers, and this was back in 2011. Economy was not doing great, and I remember I got a job offer that at the time would have paid a $60,000 base and maybe a $30,000 expected bonus. And it was from a company who this recruiter said was very selective. The recruiter said I was, one of 50 candidates that they sent there who the company actually wanted to extend an offer to. And I remember thinking, yeah, that's great that this company is interested in me, but I want to work for Google because Google's going to open more doors if I want to go to business school, if I want to start my own business and meet quality engineers. Google is the starting ground for me. And so I remember telling my dad in 2011 that I'm not taking this job offer that would project to pay me $90,000, and I'm gonna aim for the goal. I'm gonna go for Google. And my dad was like, I don't know, the economy isn't great. You might want to just take that job. And stubbornly, I persisted, and I figured out that if I could get myself invited on campus, I could basically elevator pitch my way to Google. And so that's what I did. I convinced a Vanderbilt alumnus to invite me on campus for breakfast. I wore a custom tailored suit that I got made in Hong Kong. And I just knew that if I came in looking like I was on top of my shit, that somebody was going to bet on me. And so after breakfast, I was introduced to a hiring manager and a director. And they asked me, why do you want to get into sales? And I gave them a 20 to 30-second pitch for I'm used to being in competitive environments. When I was a college baseball player, our performance was evaluated and measured every day. Every day we would come to the field and look at the stats to see how we did relative to our competition the day before. And I thrive in competitive environments like that. Well, guess what? I told them that in 15 seconds. And in those 15 seconds, I made more progress getting a job at Google than I made the 6 weeks prior trying to Hail Mary my resume into an online black hole, hoping somebody would look at it. Because one thing that you don't realize as a job applicant is the recruiters just follow the instructions that they're given. And no recruiter is given instructions, hey, give minor league baseball players a chance. Because what's the chances you have a minor league baseball player or an Olympic athlete applying for your job? Recruiters might be told, hey, give somebody with military experience or a high level sports background a little bit of a boost, but they're still going to end up looking for role specific experience that there's a very good chance that you don't have. And so the only way that you're going to overcome the gap that you have in your resume relative to other candidates is if you're able to talk to a hiring manager in person and convince them that you have the intelligence and the drive to essentially make up the 1 to 2 year experience gap that you lack compared to the other candidates. Because ultimately, if you're smart, if you're good looking, if you're in shape, if you're articulate, if you're confident, somebody's going to bet on you, and you just need to be able to get in front of them and articulate your case. Well, guess what? After 15 seconds of elevator pitching myself, I basically got that job. I had to go through an interview process where I quote unquote interviewed with the online recruiter, the person who reached out to me, and I was going to pass that interview no matter what. But they had to follow the process. And then I was invited onto the Google campus where I interviewed with 4 different people for 30 minutes. And they asked me logical questions that I answered logically. And you know what? That went completely fine. My hiring manager at the time actually told me at the beginning of our interview, I want to hire you. I just need to make sure you're smart enough for the job. And so he asked me logical questions that I answered logically. He was okay with it. And they extended me a job offer. And back then, my first year working at Google, I made like $92,000 in 2012. It would have been my first full year with great benefits, 50% match for our 401k, stock options, or RSUs, as well as free food on campus. It was a great experience. It was a great opportunity, and probably the most valuable opportunity in retrospect was being able to work with smart people that convinced me that I was actually smart enough to work, surrounded by Ivy Leaguers, even though I never applied myself in school the way I would have needed to get into an Ivy League without sports. Being surrounded by highly credentialed, motivated people, as you are at a company like Google, just surrounded me with good ideas. And so when you applied the drive that I already have, and you factored in the fact that I was surrounded by pretty smart guys and girls for 6 years, I learned a lot, but I was still stuck in a corporate environment that ultimately throttles you if you're very competitive, right? Because really, really competitive people look at what's going on at the national level and they say, I'm 25, I'm 27, I'm 30. Yeah, I'm doing better than 97% of people, but I want to be doing better than 99.9% of people. And no matter how smart you are, and no matter how many mountains you move, if you join a large company at a lower or mid level, you are not going to get elevated into a senior level position, no matter how smart you are, no matter what you do. And that was very frustrating to me because as an athlete, I knew that there was no cap on my performance. I was the only one who capped myself. And to enter into a corporate environment where I heard that you can only get promoted once per year, and that's frankly not going to happen anyway, and the promotion process is structured to throttle your ascent, which is not the case when you play sports. When you play sports, the coach is under pressure to have the best 9 players, as a baseball coach, on the field at all times. Otherwise, he's more likely to lose and he's going to lose his job eventually. But at a corporation, you don't have your smartest people at large corporations in the most senior roles because that creates way too much chaos, way too much turmoil. And it also alerts the junior members that they're probably quite underpaid and that they can ask for more and they deserve more. And so a very undercovered way that large companies make money is they throttle the ascent of their junior employees. They keep them paid well, but frankly undercompensated relative to what they can do. And if you can get a lot of people working for $130,000 who are doing $330,000 worth of work, you make significant profits. And the name of the game at these white shoe firms is to get as many $130,000 employees in as possible who can produce $330,000 or more per head. If you can get 1 million people making you a $200,000 gross profit, well, you're not going to get 1 million people, but if you can get 1,000 people making you a $200,000 gross profit per year, that's $200 million in gross profits. And if you can get 10,000 of them, that's $2 billion. And if you're a company the size of Google and you get 100,000 people who you're profiting $200,000 a year off of, that's $20 billion of profit. And so that's how companies work. They need to keep people undercompensated, but happy enough to stay. And if you're really, really competitive, that's going to frustrate you the way it frustrated me. I didn't leave Google for several years because I realized if I'm making $150,000, $200,000 a year and my job is sort of fun, it's not that hard. Yeah, I got to deal with some corporate BS, but it's not that bad. I always figured out a way to speak my mind, even when it was not politically correct. And so I was just playing the waiting game where I'll save $50,000 every year I'm here, but I'm not going to jump ship for just anything, the way I saw a lot of my colleagues doing. Ultimately, crypto markets started, getting mainstream in 2017, and I left in 2018 to join a cryptocurrency exchange. But that took 6 years. It was 6 years of frustration before I ultimately made that move, and a few more years of frustration being an employee of somebody else before I could actually work for myself.
So those 6 years of frustration, what was that like on a day-to-day basis? Did you wake up just pissed off that you had to, I mean, you
Yeah.
said that you were able to make the most of it, but 6 years is a long time.
Oh, yeah. I mean, working out in the morning was very, very helpful for me because one thing that a lot of people miss when they switch from sports to a corporate environment is they lose the idea that they're in control of their own dopamine. So, this is something that I work with clients on. We want to be able to self source our own dopamine. Anytime you're dependent on a third party, whether it's your iPhone, whether it's YouTube or whether it's a corporation to make you feel good, you're going to lose the ability to make yourself feel good. And so you're going to be depressed if you don't get the input or praise of that third party. You'll become a slave to that third party. And so one thing that I did, and I didn't even realize this at the time, it was sort of instinctual. I kept going to the gym primarily so I could eat delicious food and still look good. But secondarily, what it did is it gave me self-confidence. It gave me a source of pride to feel good about myself, independent of my company, independent of my promotion status, independent of what my boss told me. And that carried me through. It left me as a frustrated employee, but not so frustrated that I rubbed my colleagues the wrong way. Yeah, I was very frustrated when I would go home from work. I was thinking, oh, I should be doing something better than this. I'm better than this. This isn't for me. But I was patient with it because I realized that having a job that pays $150K that allows you to work 40 hours a week and not really work when you go home is rare. And I wanted to cherish that despite the fact that I was frustrated with it.
That's a good that's a good perspective to keep, because you really can't just jump. You can't just go, just quit your job. Well, that maybe I'll ask you that. Like, what are your thoughts on people that just quit their job and just go and do something versus kind of making that transition to how you did ultimately to what you're doing now, like subsidizing almost what you're working on a little bit?
It really depends on your risk tolerance. So
Yeah.
I did not start working for myself until I already had a company that was making $10,000 per month and I had $1 million in assets. That was the level of risk that I was comfortable taking, which is not that much compared to most entrepreneurs. So there's a lot of entrepreneurs who are much more risk tolerant than I was. But I wanted to have, some track record of success with my side hustle before I made it my main hustle. And so, through COVID, that's when I started selling digital products around the fitness system that I created. And I realized at the time I could make $8, 9, 10, 11, $12,000 a month selling these digital products on Twitter. And so when you combine that with some coaching offers that I started to launch in early 2021, I was making over $10,000 a month, barely over $10,000 a month, but over $10,000 a month. And going into 2021, I thought, well, that might not be enough to live the way that I want to live in California, but in Texas, that should be fine. And so I ended up moving to Austin, and discontinuing my work with the cryptocurrency exchange, going full time on the business that I'm working on now, which has become a combination of fitness and executive coaching. And then I had assets to fall back on if I needed to, but fortunately, I've been able to grow my business from $10,000 a month to where it has replaced the income that I was making at my previous jobs. And looking back, I can't say I'm unhappy for waiting as long as I did.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the timing needed to be the way it was. Otherwise, I wasn't going to make the jump. It was stressful enough as it was with all of that cushion that I had. And so you got to be realistic with yourself. Can you be the type of person who can succeed with credit card debt, or who can succeed with $1,000 in your bank account? I don't know if I'm that kind of person. I've never tested it. Frankly, I don't want to test it. I know some people who have succeeded through conditions like that. I don't think that would get the most out of me. So I've avoided that, and thankfully haven't had to grapple with that circumstance thus far in my life. So it's really case specific, but I will say that there's a lot of people who think they can do it who can't do it. And so it is helpful to demonstrate some sort of track record. Now, that doesn't mean you need to be making $10,000 a month to go all in on your side hustle. But if you can make a few $1,000s a month on something part-time, there's a good chance you can scale it much larger once you're fully dedicated to it. But the hardest $1,000 to make online is your first $1,000 a month. And so why don't you, my advice to somebody who is, say, in my shoes 5 or 6 years ago, is try to make $1,000 a month. See if you can make $1,000 a month. And once you can, then make a decision for, if you want to bet on it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. What kind of relationship do you have with money? Like how do you think about money? I mean, you've worked at a crypto exchange. I'm sure you're getting paid now in dollars, right? US
Mhm.
dollars. Like, just how do you
Mostly, yeah.
think? Yeah, how do you think about money?
Well, I think money's fake, right? And so, yes, fiat currencies are created by central banks and they're distributed through the economy electronically. And so, our generation has seen massive fluctuations in net worth, particularly for anybody who has exposure to cryptocurrencies. And so, one day you might feel rich, one day you might feel poor, but you own the same stuff. So, I think money has a couple use cases. Number one, you need to be able to buy things over the next 90 days of your life. So like I don't care what something is going to be worth in 5 years or 10 years if you don't have enough US dollar cash to cover your US dollar obligations for the next 90 days, you're going to be stressed out, right? But as far as what's the US dollar going to become, I think the US dollar is going to continue to lose value as it has since we went off the gold standard 53 years ago. So, where does that mean I'm investing my money? Well, back in 2011, when I left the hedge fund to work at Google, I was getting gold bullion and silver bullion delivered to our office while I was like looking at job openings from Coinbase. So yeah, like had I put, even 10% of what I invested in gold or silver bullion into crypto at the time, I would be very wealthy right now. Probably
Mhm.
have like $40 million based on today's prices. Of course, I probably would have sold Bitcoin, when it went from like $1 to $1,000.
Yeah.
So, would I actually have held it all the way up to $40 million? Probably not. Um, but I look at money as number one, it does help you become free because if you're not dependent on somebody else for money, you can work for yourself or not work at all. And I think the challenge with a lot of people is they just don't have any money. And if you don't have any money, you have to work for somebody. And if you have to work for somebody, you're not going to get a good price for your labor. So money affords you optionality, and optionality allows you to negotiate more favorable rates, more favorable conditions for yourself. And the better life is, the better it gets. And the worse life is, the worse it gets. So for people with limited options, life is tough, right? You have to accept the terms that your employer presents. If you want a raise and they don't want to give it to you, tough luck. But the more options you can create, whether it's inside your company or more likely outside your company, because companies don't want to actually encourage employees to have more options than them because it reduces their bargaining power and makes
Mhm.
them pay you more, the better it is for you. So I never tried to get promoted at any company that I worked for. I got promoted twice at Google, but it was just because I wanted to be competent and likable for people who I might want to work with later on. Um, but I never celebrated a promotion. I never wanted to make my skill set so narrowly defined that I was only going to be able to get compensated well by one employer. It was very intuitive to me after working for the hedge fund that if you want to get a good price, you need to get multiple bids. And if you're just trying to get promoted within your own company, you have one bidder. You need to develop your resume in such a way that you will have demand across your industry. You need multiple bids to get a good offer, and you get that good offer whenever year two, three, four, then you got to take it. But if you can't get multiple bids, good luck getting an offer that you think is fair. You're probably not going to have a lot of success or at least a lot of enjoyment doing what you're doing.
Yep. Yeah, man. It's right. That's what I think about. Just the my relationship with money personally, because I work for a big corporation. Yeah, and I'm like, I mean, the fact that you're not celebrating the promotion, that's what you see. I mean, you see it on LinkedIn. You see everybody's like, congratulations, you promoted the manager, and that's great. I guess if that's what the route that you want to go, but ultimately, if you want to become free and do something on your own, that it's probably not a good spot to be in. So, um, what I wanted to ask you about, do you have a family?
Yeah, I have a girlfriend, and she brought a 5-year-old with her in our relationship, and so
Really?
we began dating almost 3 years ago now. So her 5-year-old was almost three at the time. So she
Hmm.
was two, almost three. And so I've effectively been her dad for the last 2 years,
Yeah.
2 years and some change.
How did that change your perspective, if at all?
Well, a lot, because I have multiple people that I need to be concerned about now rather than just worrying about myself. It's a lot easier to become an entrepreneur when you're worried about yourself. Some people say, well, no, if I have a family, that gives me motivation. I've never struggled with motivation issues. And so for me, it was important for me in my career to become financially stable before trying to build and grow a family. And people will debate that. I'm quite old for not having biological kids of my own. I'm 38 and a half,
Mhm.
right? And so it's probably time for me to start having some biological kids of my own. But I'm more risk averse than a lot of people. And I always felt like I would be taken advantage of in an environment where I was dependent on other people for money. And so, I think over the last several years, I've been lucky, fortunate, perhaps astute enough to be in a position where that doesn't seem so risky anymore. But I think as we get older, no matter how much money you have, you need younger people to love you and eventually take care of you. And so if you don't do that, that used to be the original retirement plan. Nobody had 401ks, very few people owned stocks, but they invested in their children, and their children ultimately took care of them when they were older.
Mhm.
And so that's becoming more apparent to me as I become a little bit older, start getting more gray hair, and start realizing that I'm mortal. Is I need to build a family, for when I become 50, 60, 70 years old.
It's funny that you say you're risk averse because if somebody's just looking at you from the outside, they'd be like, "All right, this guy's probably super risky." I mean, he's invested in cryptocurrency, he's got his online business and everything like that. It's I don't know. Well, it's just funny that you think. I mean, to you, you're risk averse, and I feel the same way about myself. Like I need to have. So here, actually, I'll tell you my quick story. Like I worked at a big insurance company,
Hmm.
and then I did that for a couple years, and then COVID hit. And then I actually went to work for this company called Alto IRA, which was like cryptocurrency and IRA, everything like that.
Hmm.
And everybody around me was like, dude, what are you doing? Like, why would you have a good job and all this stuff? And I kind of took into consideration a lot of what people were saying. And I stayed for about 10 months because it was just there was a lot of unknown, you know what I mean? There was a lot of
Yeah.
unknown, and I was like, and I ended up going back to the company. So
Mm.
I'm like very calculated with some of these risks that I take, and I think that I'm risk averse. But now I jump back to what I was doing before a little bit, but I still have this kind of itch. I don't know if it's entrepreneurial or whatever it is. I'm recording a podcast, so I don't know. I don't really have a question around that, but that was just kind of my journey. Like now I'm back, but I still have this kind of itch to do something on my own, you know?
Yeah. Well, it takes multiple years for a contrarian idea to play out.
Hmm.
And that's the thing that, I work with a lot of successful people, right? People who've made millions of dollars at startups. And one of the things that's very common for people who've made millions of dollars at startups is they never thought that they would make millions of dollars at that startup that they were at. It was a very questionable use of their time at the time. It just so happened 3 years later, things went in a good direction and they ultimately got paid out in their options. And so I almost think that as humans, we lack the foresight to realize how good things could be, or even how bad things could be. When I think about the best things that have happened to me this year and the worst things that have happened to me this year, both far exceed what I expected could have happened at the beginning of the year. Right? We got in a car accident. I took our 5-year-old to a father-daughter dance in early March. We got rear-ended while we were at a red light. There's nothing we could have done about that. Car was going 50 miles an hour, just didn't see us because he was looking at the screen on his dashboard. So just bam, hit us, right? And so, I've had to do, more chiropractic work and some stem cell work just to get my back in the position that it was before that accident. And that was not on my radar. I mean, I'm very cognizant that car accidents can happen, but I just wasn't expecting that to happen, right? And so that was way worse than anything I could have possibly imagined happening. But on the flip side, with how the election has played out, and my view on government, and my experience in the cryptocurrency space, and the fact that we're going to have crypto friendly regulation, like I never expected that to happen on the positive side, and I never expected the downstream effects from that. And so both outcomes were far beyond what I believed what were in the spectrum of possibilities. And the only thing that changed my mind was time. And so if you don't have the ability to let your investment thesis play out, over a multi-year period of time, like you're probably not going to get your money's worth or your time's worth. You're probably going to end up getting sold short. You're probably going to end up wasting your time. But if you can dedicate 3 years to something, there's a good chance that something that you can't even foresee will happen. When I got into crypto, the market crashed, right? Bitcoin topped out at almost $20,000 in December 2017. I didn't start working in the industry until June 2018, when Bitcoin was maybe at $7,000, $8,000, $6, 7, $8,000. So it had already gone down by 60% or so. And then by the end of 2018, I think Bitcoin was like $4,000 or $5,000. It was very, very low. The market was totally deflated by the end of 2018. A lot of people were really questioning their investment in the space, myself included, right? But for the people who stuck it out and maybe accumulated more and just waited 3 years, or even just waited 2 years, right? Any investment that they had would have 10x'd, right? Because the Bitcoin highs in 2020 were twice what the Bitcoin highs were in 2017. But anybody who folded their cards thinking, you know what, this is a disaster, a lot of these projects are scams, which they were, that would have been correct, they would not have borne the fruits of their labor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I lost money because I had a wallet and it just went poof. I think it was BlockFi. Yeah, it just.
Oh wow.
Yeah, got screwed. so
So BlockFi didn't make sense to me. I was like, you're paying me 2% interest. Why do I need 2% interest on this?
I know.
This doesn't make sense.
So that's, I guess that kind of speaks to the human psychology part of it. It's like I got effed by that, and then I'm like, you know what? I'm going to stay away from this for a while, and then of course, it's like it's back. So I don't know. It's just it's kind of interesting how that works. Unfortunately, in that situation, but one thing I was curious to ask you about is you spend a lot of time online and Twitter. I mean, you run an online business. How do you stay tethered, like in reality, outside of that? If that makes sense. Like,
well, lifting heavy weights forces you to stay tethered to reality, because you can have all these ideas about how things work, and you go in the gym and you can't move that weight, you're going to be proven wrong. Forcing yourself to be in very good shape forces you to maintain a degree of relationship with reality, which is why I trust people who are in shape more than those who are not. Because how do you let yourself get so far out of shape that it's physically apparent and visually obvious to others? There has to be some issue with your relationship with the reality. And so the act of getting fit forces you to be grounded. I also spend time with real people. My dad does not spend time online. My mom spends too much time online, but my dad does not spend much time online. Mm-hmm. And so I interact with him. I interact with other guys at the gym. And so a lot of the people who I do interact with are not terminally online the way that I am. Could I be doing better? Well, a lot of my social circles also baseball. These baseball guys aren't spending all their time on Twitter. And so I think from working in a lot of industries, I have connections in a lot of different industries, and I try to stay in touch with as many people as I can. And so hopefully that grounds me enough, as much as I need to be grounded.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're running an online business. Yeah, and that's, it's not negative or positive. I think I spend a lot of time online. I'm not making any money online. So it's like you're literally, that's your business. But hey, so we'll wrap this up in a few minutes. I'm just appreciative of your time here, Alex. But
yeah,
one thing, and we've talked, it's kind of been weaved throughout this conversation, but just an overall sense that people are kind of fed up with the corporate nonsense. And I think that you saw that in not necessarily the corporate nonsense, but with the election and everything. Like people, they spoke for what they believe in, and there's a sense of optimism. What do you think about that? Like just people that are kind of fed up with system feeding things down their throat and maybe being just upset with that, but not knowing what to do. What are your thoughts on that? Like how can people think about that?
Well, ultimately, no matter how much progress the incoming administration is going to be able to make, it's up to you to really change your life, because all they're going to be able to do is put the wind at your back. But guess what? if you can't hit the ball 280 feet, it doesn't matter how strong the wind is, you're not going to hit a home run, right? So you need to be able to put the ball in play on your own. What good leadership can do is ultimately open up the playing field for you, ultimately give you a little bit of a boost. I think effectively over the last 4 years, it's been the equivalent of us hitting with a gust of wind blowing in. That doesn't mean that you can't hit with a gust of wind blowing in. You have to be successful hitting with gusts of wind blowing in sometimes, otherwise, you're probably not going to be a very good hitter. Good hitters succeed with gusts of wind blowing in, but they become great hitters when those gusts of wind start blowing out. And so ultimately, 90% of the job is still going to be on your shoulders. But there is reason for optimism in thinking that you don't have to be as perfect as you previously had to be. And there's a lot of hope out there. And I think that's going to open up a lot of investment, and people are going to be more confident spending money. So I do anticipate 2025 to be a very bullish year that I'm looking forward to, probably in ways that I've not looked forward to in years as an adult, if not my whole life.
That's amazing. That's awesome, man. What do you think if we were to have this conversation 5 years from now? What what do you think what position would you be in at that point?
Well, I hope I'll still be healthy. Hopefully, I'll have a bigger family. And I do think that my wealth is going to grow quite a bit.
Hmm.
Um, Hard to put an estimate on that, but I think there's a good chance that I could grow my net worth by 150% over the next 5 years, maybe significantly more than that, maybe not at all. But as I mentioned, like the best things in life that happen to you are far outside of the spectrum of what you can even understand right now. And so, I have some investments in projects that, frankly, could make me very wealthy. They could also go to zero. But I know from living a very different life from most people over the last 20 years that if you just stay in the game long enough, crazy things happen. And my plan is to stay in the game as long as I can and let these crazy things happen to me in a good way.
I love that. Yeah, man. You got to stay in the game. Most people don't stay in the game, and they take themselves out. And that's what you said. I think it might have been with Brett. You're like most people, they'll start a project, and you really need what was it, 90 days to see it
Yeah.
through or something. Yeah, because you're not gonna see any progress in a week, 2 weeks, even 3 weeks. So it's like, yeah, you got to stay in the game and just keep chipping away. So I love
Hmm.
it. Awesome, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
Listen, Alex, thank you for your time. Where can people find you if they're curious just to hear more about your
Easiest
story?
place, come to me on Twitter, Alex Feinberg one, Feinberg. That's how you spell my name, Alex Feinberg with the digit one. That's my handle. Keep my DMs open, at least for now. So you better hop on it fast before I get flooded with too many of them. But yeah, if you want to reach out, comment on my stuff, send me a DM. We can jam if you're looking to get in better shape or apply some of these mental models into how you pursue your life and your business. Obviously, hit me up with that as well. But yeah, thank you very much for having me on, Joe.
Yes, sir. Alex. Awesome, man. All right. We'll do this again at some point. Appreciate it.
Okay, sounds
All
good. You
righty.
bet.